Hi, folks. Ryan Honeyman here from Lift Economy. Many folks have come to us over the last 10 years and asked, how do I get more involved in creating an economy that works for the benefit of all life? They also ask, what skills and experiences do I need to help make this transition? So, 3 years ago, we created something called the Next Economy MBA to help address this and similar questions. Lift Economy's Next Economy MBA is an online course that's designed for entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, students, recent graduates, employees, and folks who want to learn more about transformational next economy strategies and businesses. Join the growing alumni network of nearly 250 alumni who've gone through this program and learned essential skills and hopefully built lifelong relationships for catalyzing businesses in the emergent and regenerative economy. So we encourage you to check out our course. You can go to lifteconomy.com/MBA. The next course, Cohort 7, starts on September 21st, 2021. So once again, go to www.lifteconomy.com/MBA. And now, on with the show. Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy. Rick, welcome to the show.
Yeah, hi, Ryan. Nice to join you.
When someone asks you, what do you do? What do you typically respond? How do you respond to that question?
Well, my role at Patagonia has changed over the years, and it actually goes back to the beginning of the company as one of Yvon Chouinard's, the founder of Patagonia's climbing partners. He and I have been not just mountaineering partners, but really close friends for probably longer than either of us care to consider right now. It's going into the many, many decades. But I, in the beginning of the company, worked in support of the effort as a consultant or contractor, I suppose, assisting with marketing efforts. I did that for a number of years. I was a photographer and filmmaker back in the day and supported the company's marketing, creating what are now called assets, and then had the probably unusual progression, although in the context of Patagonia, it's such quirky business, it seems completely normal to me. I then was invited to join the board of directors, and I was on the board for a while, and an opening came up. The company needed somebody to oversee all of its environmental initiatives, which are really the reason we're in business, which I can speak about in a moment. And so 12 years ago, I went off the board and became an employee. First job I've ever had in my life. I've always been self-employed up until then, and my wife leaned on me to finally try this work thing where you get a regular paycheck. And it's been wonderful. It's been just such an unusual opportunity, not to work for a company and be an employee, but to really work for what essentially is as close to a not-for-profit organization as a for-profit company can probably ever be. It is a privilege, not a job.
Fantastic. It's interesting to hear that your wife was one of the main people who made you get a job. I can resonate with that.
My wife also worked here for 20 years, co-founding the marketing department, and she's been involved in many of the other initiatives of the company that have really created value in addition to our dedication to using the company for environmental protection. We're also leaders in the way we support our employees through our daycare center, for example, and the other support we give to a whole working environment where the company really makes an effort to meld together our employees' personal lives with our work lives. That's actually a goal, even though it might sound like something you want to avoid. It's something that we try and do so that we seamlessly, as close to seamlessly as we can, support our employees' full lives here. So she's really integral in working with Yvonne's wife Melinda to realize a lot of those programs. But the mission of the company, is stated clearly to build the best product we can, to do that causing no unnecessary harm, and then finally to use the success of our business to implement solutions to the environmental crisis. And that's a long and complex mission, but it's a complex challenge. And this company is in business to realize that mission, and in particular, as the last part says, to find solutions to the environmental crisis. And it's probably a question that would come to many of your listeners' minds as to, where does that come from? Why does a company exist not to make its shareholders wealthy, but rather to use the wealth that it creates to, again, be an agent for our environmental protection? And the answer goes back to my initial acquaintance, the way I know Yvonne originally, which is, again, as I said, through climbing and mountaineering, and as climbers, and especially as climbers who were out in the wild parts of the world, where we saw firsthand and learned and got into our bones what wildness really is. Then as we saw that wildness degrade right in front of our eyes over our own lifetimes, as we've witnessed the glaciers we once climbed literally melt away, and many of the wild places that we loved as in our younger years disappear as human development has encroached increasingly on those wild places. As now with climate change, we've seen habitats literally shift from under the feet of wildlife and move away so that the biodiversity is threatened. We've seen these things in our own lifetime with our own eyes. So that's where our commitment comes from. It's really rooted in that, in our love for wild places, and consequently our commitment to use the company to protect them. But in addition, we extend that to other areas of environmental protection. The mission, again, going back to that statement, is, as I said, to build the best product, but do it causing no unnecessary harm. And that no unnecessary harm part is what is frequently now called the sustainability commitments. And so we go wide and deep into that area as well.
It's interesting because I remember Yvonne saying at some point that the clothing part of Patagonia was actually designed to be an irresponsible business to support your climbing business. Can you talk a little bit about the sort of climbing piece and how the irresponsible company turned into be your main driver of change?
Yeah, he sometimes says that he's a reluctant businessman, and he only got into business to support his climbing habit and his surfing habit. And many of us here are the same in that regard. I became a photographer and filmmaker, and then finally a marketing consultant, and finally an employee of a company. Primarily originally to support my climbing habit and my adventure habit, as it were. So that was our motivation. But then, as I said, as we inevitably matured, well, maybe not inevitably, but most of us did, and as adventurers, we again saw the degradation going on around us. Then it became much more than just some way to support our habit, as it were, and it really became the way we as individuals could use our time on this planet to try to provide solutions, to make a difference. And that really became the reason we're in business, as I said. So it's been a shift over the decades. But because Yvonne has really decided to keep the company, and again to use it as a tool for environmental protection, I think we've become an interesting model for how business can contribute to environmental protection. As our mission says, providing, we hope, solutions to the crisis that we all face. And I might say, going back to that mission again, we very carefully chose every single word in that mission, and we very purposefully chose to use the word environmental crisis. It wasn't an environmental problem. Problems have solutions. This is a predicament. And predicaments don't necessarily have solutions, at least not yet. And a predicament and a crisis is indeed exactly what we think we're in right now.
I've always wondered with Patagonia, you're so strong on environmental issues. Was the mission ever thought about, solve the social and environmental challenges, or, how does social or community-based improvement factor into Patagonia's mission?
Well, we have thought long and deep and wide about that, and we've concluded that when you go through the exercise of digging down into any social justice issue far enough to find the cause of the problem, that more often than not, those causes have some root in environmental issues, especially environmental degradation. I mean, even something like the AIDS crisis or the Zika crisis going on right now. If you look back into those issues far enough, you'll discover some environmental degradation that has upset the regular balance in an ecosystem, that has unleashed viruses. And consequently, we think that if we're really in the business of finding solutions to the causes of the environmental crisis, that focusing on environmental degradation is probably the best place for us to use our resources. Now, having said that, we also find it very interesting and fascinating, I would even add, that in the last decade, the emerging generation, the millennials, don't really separate social justice from environmental impact issues nearly as much as those of us in the older generations are in the habit of doing. For them, it's one and the same, and that actually goes back and links to the way we viewed it all along over the last 40-some years. So we're fascinated in this consideration that social justice and environmental degradation are just two sides of the same coin, in the sense that they both have at their roots the same source and causes, instead of just symptoms of the issues we're all facing. So we do address social justice issues, but often we do it through our commitments to environmental protection. Now, occasionally, in our efforts to cause no unnecessary harm, again, realizing our mission, we do discover that there are social justice problems in our supply chain, especially where we've got to address them specifically. I mean, a good example of that would be a recent discovery that amongst our Tier 2 and 3 suppliers, which in apparel are mills and dye houses in Taiwan, were using effectively slaves in their companies, where they were bringing in workers from South Asia and Southeast Asia, confiscating their passports, essentially holding them hostage until they earned back the cost of their transportation and their upkeep. And often it would take 3 to 5 years for them to win back their passports. Well, effectively, that's slave labor. That's keeping people indentured against their own wishes often. And when we discovered that, we worked with the Taiwanese government, we worked with the NGOs, we worked with the companies, we worked with multi-stakeholders to find a solution to that. We went public with it as an added driver, and we are in the process now of finding solutions to that, with many of the companies reversing their policies, eliminating the middle people that were responsible for confiscating the passports, and the problems are decreasing right now. So we do address these things, but in the main, we apply our resources to environmental protections for the reasons I just described.
I asked Rose Marcario this question and Phil Graves on a previous podcast, and it's Patagonia is such a leader; it's so far ahead of the average or even the above average companies that there's a sort of dichotomy where you're doing so many things, and yet I guess one question I have is making incremental changes to the garment industry, or the improvements that you're making, do you feel like it's enough to really truly address the climate crisis,
Well,
or yeah.
Patagonia is a small company.
Yeah.
We were under $1 billion in sales, and $1 billion sounds like a lot of money, but in the global economy, it's a drop in the bucket. But we like to think that we punch above our weight class, that we have a voice that's a little louder than our physical size, as it were, our monetary size. So we have influence and we have impact, but even that's at the end of the day often too limited. And we recognize that what's often really needed is what's commonly called systems change, where you really need to. What's really needed, I should say, are changes to the rules with how the global economy operates. And so we ask ourselves, well, if that's often the goal, how do you go about doing that? We try to find ways forward to create system change. I think our co-founding of the Sustainable Apparel Coalition would be an example of one such effort, where we, partnering with Walmart 6 years ago, launched a coalition which has now become the biggest trade organization in the apparel and footwear industries in the world. And the goals of this coalition are to create transparent and robust tools to measure both the environmental impacts and the social justice achievements in apparel and footwear globally, and then to use those measurements to really influence governments to change the rules. That's the strategy we've adopted in this coalition. And as I said, we're a little over 5 years into it, but we're taking ground. We've completed many of the measurement tools, and it's a suite of tools. It has to be. There's different tools for measuring different parts of our impacts in the industry. And now with those measurements, we're creating benchmarks so all the member companies can assess their position against industry averages. And then we're in the process now of implementing a roadmap towards transparency, where all these measurements will be publicly available. And we hope at that point they'll really unleash drivers that will create change in the entire apparel and footwear system. That's the theory, and that's the hope. So we probably got another 2 to 3 to 4 years before we reach the larger and higher level goals of the effort, but we're getting there. We do have a seat at the table in government-led discussions about changing the rules, especially in the EU. So it's an example of how a little small company like this can use its influence to, in this case, rally the whole industry behind an effort to create an entire global change in the rules of the game. I hope we pull it off. Of course, it's still a hypothesis that hasn't proven itself, but it's well on the way to achieving that goal.
I guess a follow-on question would be: are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future of the planet? I know that Yvonne he likes to call himself like a doom bat about the future. But what about you? Are you optimistic or pessimistic about our chances?
Well, when I'm asked that question, I sometimes refer to my friend David Quammen, who's a well-known outdoor writer. And David famously said one time that the trouble with despair as a response is that not only is it useless, it's also not very much fun. And certainly with my own limited time on Earth, as we all have, I want to enjoy it as much as I can. And sinking into despair and seeing only darkness on the horizon line is not very much fun. But I also am a realist. So certainly I'm susceptible to dropping into depressive funks when I consider the direction that we're going. When I consider if nothing more than the measurements that we use to the numbers we use to measure the health of our planet. I mean, if you look at those, it's pretty depressing. Just consider the graph of the global increase in temperatures and atmospheric CO2 and deforestation and desertification, the increases in ocean acidification and water eutrophication, and most alarmingly for me, and the saddest of all, is the decrease in the biodiversity of our planet. That you add all those things together and you get into a funk pretty quickly. But that's not getting anything. That's not making any change at all. In fact, it's getting in the way of change. And so we're doing our very best in some of the ways that I've just described to you, to use our business, as I said, to try to find some solutions to this. And I said earlier that our mission is to make the best product we can with no unnecessary harm. At least that's the first two parts of it. And that no unnecessary harm is an interesting topic to look at in the context of your question, because it, first of all, it's an interesting construction of a phrase. By using a double negative, if you make it grammatically correct, you left with the fact that you're causing harm, which is our definition of sustainability, the recognition that manufacturing any consumer good the way it's done right now is causing harm. And that informs all of our thinking here at Patagonia, and it also underlies our commitment to our philanthropy and to use our business as an agent for creating environmental solutions. By recognizing we're doing harm, we also recognize that from a moral perspective alone, we're obligated to give back. That's where our philanthropy comes from. But still, at the end of the day, we're recognizing that all we're doing is causing no unnecessary harm. We're doing less bad. But in the last 3 years, especially as we've got into the food business, we're starting to identify new ways of doing things. And in your preamble to your podcast, Ryan, you said that you're exploring regenerative ideas. And regenerative ideas is really increasingly large on our radar screen. And we think of regenerative ways of doing business as the solutions that, instead of causing less bad, could actually cause more good. So that instead of doing no unnecessary harm, as our mission says, maybe we could figure out how to create products that actually offer solutions. And so instead of doing less bad, they do more good. And the food products we're making, and we're also exploring the possibility of making more apparel products from natural fibers that use regenerative farming and grazing practices to produce the ingredients. In the case of our apparel, that would be true of cotton and wool. There are ways of raising sheep on the land that improve the soil quality of the grasslands, and as that soil quality improves, a couple big things happen. One is that the soils retain more moisture. So as we enter an era of increased water scarcity, that's a big potential solution to that issue. The bigger thing to us that happens, though, with increased soil health from following what are called rotational grazing practices, is that over time those soils begin to pull carbon out of the air and store it in the ground, just as the soil did before we human beings came along with our grazing animals. But naturally, grasslands were grazed by herds of animals that would move over them and eat down the grass quickly, just as migrating bison or wildebeest in Africa do, and then they move on, and the grasses regenerate quite quickly. And then the cycle of migratory animals over those grasses over time support healthy grasslands that build these healthy soils that increase the organic matter in the soil, both dead and living organisms in the soil. And of course, organic matter is made from carbon, and that's why the soils pull the carbon out of the air and into the ground as they increase in health. So getting those soils back to the health that they had before we human beings came along is a really interesting potential solution or partial solution to climate change. The amount of carbon that can theoretically be pulled out of the ground and or out of the air and into the ground is potentially enormous, because there's been enough test ranches and farms using these protocols now around the world in different soil types in various climates that it is increasingly, with increasing accuracy, with increasing accuracy, scientists can extrapolate the test farms and ranches to get an idea of how much carbon could be pulled into the ground if this idea really scaled. And the projections are astonishing. They're somewhere between 20 and 50%, depending on the algorithms that scientists use. But somewhere in that scoping, if you converted enough farmland and grazing land in the world to these protocols, you could pull enough carbon out of the air to get us back to pre-industrial carbon levels. We'd be at about most of those projections would pull us back to about 295 parts per million, which is where we were in the middle of the 18th century. So there are emerging ideas coming out right now that, and here's the answer to your question, quite of a long one, but these things are a glimmer of hope that really, really underpins my personal optimism. And I even see Doom-Bad Yvon getting a smile on his face when he thinks about these things. And I've actually heard him say, maybe there are solutions out there to get us out of away from that cliff that he felt we were inevitably headed towards.
You gave me a big smile with that comment about Yvon. I'm really glad to hear. It's very affirming to hear you talk about soil health and regenerative ag, because at Lift Economy we've been particularly excited about the Marin Carbon Project. And are there particular individuals or organizations or farms that you are looking to that are leading in this area or working with that can sort of be that I could point my listeners towards?
Yeah, we work with quite a few individuals. Fred Kirschenbaum is one of my buddies and friends out of Iowa and North Dakota, and he's done a lot of leading work with the Aldo Leopold Institute at the University of Iowa and Iowa State. There's a wonderful little NGO that just started up with the really catchy name Carbon Underground, and they're committed to being a clearinghouse for regenerative agriculture and grazing ideas. And they've and your listeners could check them out. There's also a little NGO out of LA that's run by some millennials that were in the music and restaurant business and got onto regenerative agriculture and got so fascinated with it that they now use part of their personal times and resources to try and advance the whole effort as well. They're a great little group of people, and they call themselves Kiss the Ground. And if you check out their website, you can also find a little video that they've created that really summarizes the whole thing most succinctly of anything I've seen in about a 4 or 5 minute clip.
And is Patagonia starting to grow sort of, I guess, climate beneficial or net positive clothing? Is that something you're working on?
We're looking into that. That's definitely something that we're considering. We've got people researching it right now. Yep. So the answer is yes. The answer is that we haven't got there yet, but we're working towards that and making it's a very interesting opportunity for us.
So where do you see Patagonia heading? Because I've heard Yvon allude to the food side of Patagonia may eventually be larger than the clothing side. Do you see Patagonia moving more strongly towards the food piece, or where do you see the next sort of 25 years, the company, how do you see it evolving?
Well, I'll answer it by first saying that human beings are really poor at predicting the future. and we're probably pretty poor at predicting our own future. And I would say most companies probably aren't too good at that. But especially a company like this that enjoys discovering new opportunities and taking a winger on them. And food, though, our commitment to food is no longer a winger. It is a serious commitment that we're in for the long term. And Yvonne's projection that that effort could eclipse our apparel business at some point out there in the horizon line is entirely possible. But the truthful answer is it's probably impossible to predict with any sort of accuracy. But it's certainly possible. And also, you've interviewed my colleague Phil Graves, who runs our investment fund that we call 20 million and change. Although now I think it's got a bigger portfolio, and probably we're way north of 20 million. But with that fund, we're investing in startups, existing companies, also that have interesting business models aligned with our own goals, and I think that through those investments, it's entirely possible that we could get increasingly involved in some of these other companies and go down different paths and avenues with them that we can't even foresee right now. So it's all pretty exciting. One thing that I think will be consistent through Patagonia's future, though, with food, with any of the startups in 20 million and change, and certainly with the apparel business that we've got up and running right now, is that all of these businesses will operate under this same mission. And again, we're absolutely committed to making the best product we can. That has a big environmental component, which may not be self-evident, but we recognize that when you build the best product, you're also building the most durable product you can, and that durability becomes one of the main components of any product's environmental footprint, and it becomes the most important component in reducing that footprint over time, because the longer a product is serviceable, the lower its impact on the planet is, and that really hockey sticks as a product extends its life into 5, 10, and 20 years. That's why we're committed to the best product, and as I said before, making it with no unnecessary harm, and then using the businesses to help find solutions to the environmental crisis. Everything we do in apparel, the food company, and probably anything we get deeply involved in through our investment fund is going to operate with that same mission. So that will be consistent, and that is one of the models for one of the business models that we really hope take root just outside of our walls and inspire other businesses to adopt similar missions and use themselves to create more solutions than they do problems.
How can the listeners help you and Patagonia, obviously not buying a bunch of jackets they don't need from you, but what sort of support do you need to sort of help you advance and grow the next economy?
Well, the support that your listeners could offer us is actually the one that you just mentioned, which is to take us up on our request to not buy more than you need. As we have analyzed the global crisis, we followed the macroeconomists who more professionally analyze trends, we can see that the global increase in population and, more importantly, the increase in affluence of that population, the increase in its consumption of goods and resources, goods and services on the planet, is the reason that all those indicators of the planet's health that I listed earlier are continue to go in the wrong direction. And going back to my comment about regenerative agriculture and grazing offering a solution, we do absolutely believe that they will, but we also believe it's going to require an all-of-the-above strategy, that you can't have one magic bullet that fixes everything. We're all going to have to continue to develop sustainability innovations that reduce the footprints of our products. We're all going to have to manage our supply chains for no unnecessary harm as we do. We're going to have to advance regenerative agriculture and grazing, but it's just one thing in a suite of solutions. And we're also going to have to add to that suite the idea that we all need to reduce our consumption. We believe that that's going to be essential moving forward. And so we ask our customers to really think about that, and I would ask your listeners to do the same thing. And your listeners are probably wondering how we can do that and continue to grow as a company. And it goes back to that. The answer goes back to that mission of making the best product with no unnecessary harm, because we believe that if we do that and we make a product that anybody listening to this can use for 5 and 10 and 20 years, and we help you fix it if it's broken and put it in the new hands if you're not using it anymore, and recycle it when it's truly worn out, then if we do all those things together, we're creating more solutions than we are problems, because we're creating responsible products that allow you, the listeners, to live responsibly, and that's a partnership that we want with you. And if we can also encourage you to not buy more than you need, then we're compounding the solutions that we're creating. So that'd be our request. And we know we're not perfect at this. I mean, you go into one of our stores and there's all this stuff that's attractive, it's made in different colors, it makes you want to buy more of it. And so we're part of that problem as well, but we're trying to do our best to manage that impact. And so this idea of buying less and only buying what you need it's an important consideration. And then listeners might be asking, well, how do you, if you succeed as a business, because more people support you for buying a jacket when they do need it, what's going to happen to all the other people that are making jackets that we're not going to buy? And that's an interesting question, and nobody has the answer to it right now, because now you're asking yourselves what's going to happen. We're asking ourselves what will happen to the global economy if consumption starts to go down, and that's new territory for everybody. But we do believe there's solutions there, because it gets down to examining, what stuff means in our lives. And in fact, even more basic than that, it gets down to asking ourselves, what does work mean in our lives? If we're not going to work to create more stuff to consume than we need, what are we going to do with our time? How are we going to contribute? And we really believe this idea of food may be a big part of the answer to that question, because regeneratively grown food requires quite a bit of input of work, but it's such fulfilling work because it's creating more solutions than it is problems, and it's creating healthy food. And maybe we need a little bit of a return to that movement. And if you think about it, that's almost a return to where we started before the Industrial Revolution started. So we don't see it as necessarily a bad thing, but a very intriguing idea to the problem. To get back to your question, I think that all of you listening to this need to join us in re-examining our relationship to stuff, to re-examining our role as consumers. We hate that word at Patagonia. We try to figure out how to replace it with some version of citizen, and we keep coming up short with anything that sticks. But know that we hate the word, but also know we're asking everybody to think about it and to join us in thinking about that. And to the extent that you can become, part of our community and support us in our efforts, we'll support you, because at the heart of it, we want to be in the business of producing the products more responsibly that will allow you to live more responsibly.
And last question, Rick, where can folks go to learn more about your environmental initiatives and other things you're working on at Patagonia?
We have a list of, we describe many of our environmental initiatives on our website at Patagonia.com, and we also annually publish a booklet, our environmental initiatives booklet, that lists everything that we do, including all the organizations that we support through our philanthropy. And there are hard copies of that available in our stores often, but it's also available online at our website.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.